Hi, I'm Ben, and this
And
is the
I'm
Bad at
Josh.
Magic podcast, and welcome to episode 21.
Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Oh yeah, I
That's all
guess
I have.
that's
That's a
like
black.
a
That's a blackjack
gambling
reference.
number. Well, here we are.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a lot going on in the world, and yet at the same time, there's not that much going on at all. But this week marked a humongous milestone in my life, so I want to talk about that after I talk about something else that happened first. So this
Spoiler
morning I
warning.
was in my living room just doing the Saturday morning chill thing. I was sitting on my couch, I know, fooling around on my phone, and I look out the window and I saw a whole bunch of insects. And at first I didn't think anything of it because it was kind of coming from around the back of the house and I could just sort of see it. And it was still going on, and it was like a big cloud, like way more than you would normally see of any kind of insect. I'm like, what is that all about? So I kind of got up and looked, and I realized it was a bee swarm, like an actual bee swarm. And I called my wife on the phone, and she looked out at the other side of the house, and she could see it there too. So we're both looking out the sides of the house, but where the swarm actually was on the end of the house. And it was so big that you could see it out both sides, like just thousands of bees.
This is like the intro to like a thriller or a horror movie where it's like one man and his family trapped in a house by killer
Yeah.
bees. Like you couldn't even leave the building. Like, how did you get outside?
I just walked outside. So
How? If you could see them all the way around the building, how did you get out without like being
well,
presumably murdered?
after a minute, the clouds started to kind of condense. So it was very much localized to the end of my house. So I just walked outside and I kind of just kept my distance and went around, and I could see there was a concentration of them on the house. I'll post a video in the show notes. And there was a bunch landed, and then the cloud flying all around. And I was like, okay, well, this is the proverbial bee swarm. Now, it was very obvious to me, I've seen a lot of bees in my life, that these were honeybees. So a quick Google search revealed that the way honeybees go is, for some reason they're forced out of their home, they'll swarm and move, follow the queen, who isn't extremely mobile, so it's kind of slow. So this cloud of bees will light from surface to surface as they continue to move until they reach their final destination. Or the swarm has grown to the point where they no longer fit all in their place, and the swarm kind of splits in half. One half stays and inhabits the old location, and the new half of the swarm has to go locate a new location. And this seemed to be, to me, what it was going on, that we had a swarm of bees here that wasn't just going somewhere, they were actually looking for a new place to live. And the Google search, like right at the top, said sometimes they'll try to go through the holes in the siding of your house, and that's exactly what it looked like, what they were doing. So I took a couple
Oh,
of photos.
so
Yeah,
then
go ahead.
so the rest of the story then is presumably the epic tale about how you, Ben Rich homeowner, killed all of these bees and got them out of your house, thereby preserving the safety of your family.
So this is not a time in the world when it's very it's looked kindly upon to kill a bunch of honeybees. You've heard of plagues that are killing them, of wasps that are infiltrating the United States that kill them, of how they're good for the environment and the vegetation and they don't hurt anyone, and on and on and on and on. I am very kindly disposed towards honeybees. I wouldn't kill them just because they were invading my house.
So then your options are to call one of those presumably very expensive, or maybe not, I don't know, those beekeepers that will come out and do the smoking thing and then haul them all away and set them up in one of those cute little white bee boxes somewhere, or you're just
Yes.
going to move.
Well, not only that, but
Oh, you're
apparently a
moving.
bee colony is incredibly lucrative to someone like that. Like the fact that they'll come and get them isn't just a kindness of their heart. Like, hey, it's a free bee colony. They can make a lot of money off of it.
This sounds like a new hobby you could take up. Why don't you
Yeah,
go get a smoker off of Amazon and you can start a honeybee hive?
yeah. Well, so it's funny because I mentioned it to my neighbor, and they go, "Oh, I'll call my friend. He's a beekeeper." And then I sent the text to my landlord, and he texted me back. He's like, "Well, I was talking to my brother-in-law who's a beekeeper." And I'm like, "Who are all these people that just have a friend that's a beekeeper?" Josh, do you have any friends that are beekeepers?
Apparently, you're going to be a beekeeper, so that's one. That's 1 degree of separation.
Okay, so the clouds. I went in the house for a few hours and I came back out to check and see if the bees had gone away, and they had definitely not gone away. They had condensed. So the swarm part was over. They were now in bedding down mode. Like they had very much condensed to a very small part of the outside of my house, and there was a lot of transit going on, just in and out, in and out, in and out. It was obvious they'd picked my house and they'd moved in to my bedroom. So if this wall right behind me, if I go over and put my ear up against this wall, I can hear this dull hum of bees in my wall.
So again, this turns into like some ridiculous movie premise where but now it's kind of turning into like a comedy where it's you, the homeowner, like, well, I don't want to hurt the bees, but they're living in your house. You've got to get rid of these bees. You're not going to let them just stay there, right?
Okay, so the landlord came over tonight because, so here's the thing. You were like, well, I didn't have all the homeowner thoughts because I'm a renter. So I think of this like a renter, not like a homeowner. I don't think these things are going to destroy my house. I'm thinking, well, that sucks for the landlord. It's not my problem unless like nice. They find a hole in the ventilation and start coming out in my daughter's room or something like that. Then it's a problem.
They're gonna.
I don't know.
You know that,
Josh. They're looking for a place to live. They found a hole in the wall. They want flowers. They don't want to come in my house.
Ben, did I tell you the story about the scorpions in my house?
Scorpions are demons. They're not.
Okay, yeah, they are little tiny walking nightmares. I agree with you there. But like you can't if you know that they're on your premises, you can't let them stay because they cause the kinds of problems like this.
Okay,
like
I'm
you
gonna
find
make a meme
them around,
of this, and I'm gonna put it in the show notes. If you Google honeybees, you get these cutesy little cartoons with smiley faces. And if you Google scorpions, I haven't done it yet, but I have a feeling what it's gonna come out like. It's not gonna be cutesy with
terrifying
smiley faces.
Nightmares.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I get fine. Okay, that's apples and oranges, but these are stinging insects that some people are deathly allergic to that can kill a person with as little as one sting, and there are now hundreds of them setting up shop in your wall in your bedroom. Like one errant, like I can't even imagine. Like if you knock over. Yeah, if you move a heavy piece of furniture wrong, you punch a hole into a hive, and they're going to swarm and kill everyone in the house. You're laughing like this isn't a deadly threat.
Okay, my kids did punch a hole in the drywall not too long ago, but I could just
Didn't think
slap
about
a
that,
piece
did
of
you?
tape over it. Like it's not that much of a threat. The bees were.
If you punch a hole in the wall right into the heart of the swarm, they're gonna freak the frick out, and they're going to kill anything that moves in that room.
Yeah, but it's it's if you don't poke the bear, he'll leave you alone, right?
You're never gonna poke it intentionally. Good Lord, you're not getting my point here. Like it could be a total accident that causes a death in your house.
Okay, well, I'm not anxious for this to be resolved. Like the bees obviously set up camp in my house. They're not coming in. They're not bothering me. I can go stand within 5 feet of where they're going in and out, and they don't even seem to notice me because it's about 8 feet up where the entrance is in and out. So I should still be able to mow my lawn without even disturbing them. I'll find out this week.
That's your house. They're disturbing you. This is my point. Like you're going about this completely
the wrong
way. Like, oh look, no, that's not a thing. They're killing me, Smalls. Of course, like I can't formulate a coherent argument because you said earlier, like, oh, I'll just put a piece of tape over the hole, and all I can think of is that stupid flex tape meme of the guy slapping the tape over the like leaking giant water thing. That is not how it would work when those are bees coming out of it.
Well, no, there was
a
point in time
your house
when the swarm was on the side of my house, like checking things out, and the queen was still on the outside, and there was a little bee going, "Hey, I found a great place. It's right through this hole over here. Come, everyone, check it out." And like they hadn't yet made up their little bee minds if that was going to be the new home yet. If at that moment someone in a beekeeper outfit had swooped in and grabbed that queen, the whole colony would have followed them, and they could have taken them there. But once she got inside the wall behind the siding, now boards have got to get torn off the outside of the house for this problem's going to get solved.
But you just said it's not your house. This is the landlord's problem.
Right,
you don't have to pay for this.
He came over, took a look at it. He just kind of put his hands on his hips and says, I'll see what I can do. I'll do some research. And I'm not particularly worried about it unless they start like chasing the children or something.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have met the world's greatest renter of all time. Like, hey, landlord, this swarm of thousands of deadly insects has moved into the house. No big deal. Whenever you get a chance to come look at it, like we're fine with them there. We just wanted to let you know.
He came over the same day, and I'm not done being the world's greatest renter yet. So I'll tell you the other half of the story later.
There's more to this story?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with the bees. Well, it's kind of related. Okay, so the other thing that's consuming my mind and my life. It was so bad that at one point you said to me, Ben, you've told me about this 3 times in the last 10 minutes. I'm like, dang, this was really high on my list of things that I'm concerned about. So you and I did a whole episode, I forget what number it was, where we talked about my missionary service that happened 25 years ago. My eldest son went when he turned 18 and has been gone for the past 21 months, and he just returned home. Now, missionary service is normally 24 months, and during that 24 months, you do not see them. So I had been his father. He'd lived in my house all the way up until 18 years of age, and then he was gone, and I hadn't seen him for 21 months. So that alone kind of made it a big deal.
That's mission success. Like, that's the goal of every parent, right? They reach 18, they leave, and you never see them
out of the
again.
house, and you never see them again. Well, so there's very much, you and I talked about this when we talked about missionary service, about how there's a culture that surrounds this. And in the pre-COVID-19 world, there was a very much a script that happens. The boys expect to go when they get old enough. You have them give one of the sermons in church in front of the whole congregation. You put a little plaque up on the wall in the church with their photo and a little like monogram, not monogrammed, I don't know, laser engraved map of where they've gone in the world, and there's a little big map of the world with push pins in it that shows where they've gone. You put up a little thing in the church with their email address so that people can write to them, and they're gone serving the Lord for 2 years.
Do you put up a little flag in your front window with a star on it?
Kind of like that.
Or is that something else? Am I thinking of the wrong thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So part of these rituals, and it was interrupted a little bit by September 11, 2001, is the joyous, the tearful farewell at the beginning and the joyous reunion at the end. It used to be that the whole family and even some friends, maybe even a girlfriend who thinks she's going to wait for 2 years, goes to the airport. Everyone's there together, and you tearfully see them off as they go to whatever part of the world they're going to be. They go to basic training first, and then they go and they're gone for 2 years, and then they come home. And at the end, there's this big joyous reunion. You're supposed to all go to the airport, all be there and welcome them, cheer, have balloons, handwritten signs, just like you see for like a ship returning from the Navy or a big group of Army guys returning from a big deployment to the Middle East. But imagine that, but for 2 years they were gone. So big deal. But now in the COVID-19 world, you not only has security moved all that well out to like the baggage claim, but now they say only one person can go to the airport. So we kind of just had to be like, well, we thought we were going to go have this big joyous reunion, but we're not. Mama's going to go pick him up at the airport. She'll bring him home. We'll say hi to him at the house. And it really just kind of killed all that. Well, and it's been happening everywhere. It's been happening to seniors graduating from high school. It's been happening to, all this is happening everywhere. This is just yet another...
I completely get that. There's ways around it. There's got to be. Like, just the top of my head, spitballing here. If it was you, like, you have a minivan, right? I presume, like a large capacity vehicle.
Minivan.
Yeah. There's no reason you can't get full-sized cardboard cutouts of your entire family and maybe some random strangers and neighbors and just get there early to the airport and just set them all up in a big line and waiting to greet your son getting back from his mission.
So there was an incident that got a lot of negative press from the church where what had happened is in one of the countries as COVID was starting to spread early on, they basically said, all right, we're taking all 200 missionaries in this mission out at once. And they would charter a plane, and since most of them were from Salt Lake City, they would fly the plane to Salt Lake City, and this plane full of 200 missionaries would show up. Well, what happened, and this was in the early days when the state of Utah just declared their, quarantine and social distancing and all that, is all these people that weren't supposed to be there all showed up at the airport all at once and made kind of an impromptu traditional thing that looked much closer to the old cultural norm in the parking garage. There were a few people there, snapped a few photos, they got out on social media, and the headline became, "Mormons Ignore Quarantine Rules."
Yep, because that's what you people do. Ignore all the rules.
Yeah.
You're such rebels.
And they very much want to be perceived as not being at odds with the laws of the land anywhere they live. So they've gotten really strict about not doing these things that are very much the cultural norm, which is hard. It's hard, and I'm going to transpose this onto anyone. Anyone right now that's trying to do a thing that you had an expectation. I've seen like online weddings. My landlord, when he came over, said his daughter had her online graduation ceremony for a class of 2020 tonight. There's all these things that people had an expectation of how they're going to celebrate it, and those celebrations are cultural events where we get together with other people and have a gathering, and now all of that's gone.
Which has just been so wonderful, because other people are the worst, just the worst.
Have there been any for your family? Like things like this you expected to happen that didn't?
Well, the biggest one that's most recently happened was yesterday. My son graduated from red belt to recommended black belt, which is the black red stripe belt for his taekwondo
Oh yeah,
class.
he'd been doing like karate lessons in the garage over video chat.
Over Zoom, yeah, and I wish it was the garage. No, it's 114 degrees, Ben. The poor kid would bake like a potato.
Forgot.
No, it's in the house. So two or three times a week, I've got to move the couch out of the living room and then move it back in the living room if I expect to watch the TV, which has been a hassle. But I'm willing to sacrifice that for my son. Anyway, so no, he's been doing all the classes on Zoom, and then today they did. The state's a little weird on how they're reopening back up. Like, my wife and I are under the impression of the opinion that it is a little too early for all of this. And the fact that my son has asthma and has been hospitalized several times in his short life because of breathing problems, we're taking zero chances with this whole thing. So while the dojo is allowing some people to come back in small groups, and like this week was graduation, several of them went back in and tested and did the graduation while they were there. They also allowed some people to do graduation over the video chat, over Zoom again. And so I had to sit in the living room with the iPad, with the camera on him while he did his form and was critiqued by all of his dojo masters and all of that. And so, whereas normally there's like a big ceremony where he gets to like go up in front of all of his peers, and then his karate masters will tie his new belt on and then tie his old belt into like a special knot and talk about the significance and the steps and, all the things that you would expect from a normal graduation.
Yeah.
Instead, he was on video chat, and then they had dropped off the belt to us previously, like a week earlier, which is funny because my wife was just riding Carter, like, you're not going to get this belt if you don't, like, get your form down perfectly.
Did he know that it had come in?
No, and he, all this time, the belt had just been in the other room. Like, he basically had gotten it. Like, it's his already. But Nicole was very.
You want to preserve the illusion of it not being possible unless he fulfills all the requirements?
Yeah, exactly. Just take it seriously, be focused, do the things that you're supposed to do. And that's a good lesson to learn anyway. But so I had to be the one to do it. I had to tie on his belt on the Zoom. Like they said, okay, Carter Fleshman, your parents have got your belt for you. They're going to tie it on. And like caught us. We knew we were going to have to do that, but I didn't know I was going to be called to the carpet. I thought they'd be like, oh, and your parents have your belt. And they would move on. Oh, no, sir. They made us the main focus on the Zoom for all the other people that were zooming into the class that day.
Uh-huh.
And then, so I'm on the spot trying to tie this belt. And I swear I've done it 100 times for this kid. But you know how it is when you're trying to do public math and it all just falls out of your head.
Yeah.
And like it took a minute. And like then... it's bad when they start trying to chip in. Like, oh no, you do the other one.
Oh
on
no!
On top.
Oh.
No, not like that. No. Yeah. And
I'm
like,
covering
shut
my
up, lady.
eyes.
You're not making it any better. No, that was probably the biggest and the only thing that has happened recently. Yeah. As far as the social cultural events that are normally big group things that got shut down and are just live via satellite.
So it's interesting what you just suggested, that our society is trying to preserve a mechanism that we utilize to motivate people. And that is that we have, something we're trying to perform, like getting promoted in a belt in martial arts, and the requirements that you have to do. And we've had to kind of soften all of our requirements because of this quarantine and all the implications that has. You know, you can't be in the same room and spar and those kinds of things. So we have to come up with a substitute for it. Like we had with the physical fitness test, like we had with that. We had a fight in our house because in elementary school, the teachers were trying to figure out how to get the children to do their online homework that they were assigning to them. And they basically told my 10-year-old daughter that she was going to have to save all of her papers and give them to them at the beginning of the next school year when they come back to school. So,
No.
Yeah, your laugh is so appropriate. So what happened is the school year ended, the grades were finalized, and in the book, these grades might as well be written in stone. You know, they're not going to change. My daughter could have not done any of that homework. It's all final. But she's still believing in her head this lie that she's been told by her teachers that they're going to check her homework at next school year. And so my wife's trying to go through and clean out all of the school papers and stuff like that. And she starts trying to throw these things away. And my daughter's throwing a fit. No, Mom, I need those. I have to take them. And she's like, your teacher isn't going to look at them.
That's so funny. Like, I only have the 2 kids, and they already want to save like every scrap of paper. Like they think it's some precious artifact of their youth, or like the culmination. Like, and I guess to them, it is the culmination of all the knowledge that they've obtained to that point in their existence. And look at this hand turkey that I drew. We must preserve this hand turkey. And it's like our job to politely be like, sweetie, we have 4,000 sheets of random junk that you bring home. We can't keep any of it.
So I'm wondering about. I had this existential crisis about this. I'm thinking, all right, what if we level with the kids and say, look, you know, because of this thing that's going on, we can't check all your papers. Like we just can't. And so we're just going to give you credit as if you've done them. We want you to do them. Like if we actually told the kids the truth, would all the things that we're afraid would happen? Do we have to lie to them?
It depends on which level of truth you're talking about, because there's the level where, listen, you've all, like, without doing any work, I can tell you who's going to graduate this year and who's not, just based on what I've seen of you kids. Or do we tell them the deeper truth where, well, everybody, like, this doesn't really matter anyway. Like, everything up through high school is kind of null and void.
Well, okay, I saw this. My daughter's a junior in high school, and they told them kind of early on before they figured out how they were going to do the online schooling thing, look, whatever grade you got, third quarter, if your fourth quarter grade is below that, we'll just give you your third quarter grade for fourth quarter. And my daughter had gotten straight A's third quarter. And man, if there were ever anything to kill a junior's motivation when you give them a bunch of hard homework assignments for fourth quarter, it's nothing you do matters.
Well, this is actually an excellent life lesson that your kids should be learning, taking away from this. Is there's going to be situations where the amount of effort that you put in does not change the output, and you should adjust your actions accordingly.
Right. I mean, maybe she's doing the absolute right thing and just kind of preserving her effort and recognizing that even if she works really hard on these frustrating homework assignments, it's not going to change her grade, so why try? Or does she recognize the inherent value of receiving an education and do it anyway? That definitely didn't happen.
I would encourage you as the parent to kind of mold this. Like, if she exhibits the, like, oh, well, none of this, like, matters and it's frustrating and I don't want to do it. Like, instead of just letting her slack off and do nothing, like, encourage her to explore something. Well, you have to do, this is kind of what Nicole has been doing, and she's been so good with the kids, is if you don't want to do this specific thing, like, here's the small subset of things that I'm going to force you to do because you need a well-rounded education. You're going to do this math, you're going to do this reading. But then you're still going to do work for this set amount of time. If you finish the math early, then you can choose what you want to do.
Nice.
In this realm of things, but you're still going to learn.
That's great. I love it. That's brilliant, Nicole. Alicia tends to be the driver when it comes to educational things, and she's done something very similar to that. So good on our wives in these times.
Well, Nicole does the lion's share of all the helping and the teaching and all that. And she's very focused on making sure the kids get a quality education in these crazy times. My contribution to that is I will randomly throw up a YouTube video about some cool sciencey thing or mechanical engineering. Be like, look at this awesome video that Destin did about Snatch blocks.
Did you see the one that Mark Rober did this week about squirrels breaking into bird feeders?
Your wife posted on Facebook. My wife showed it to me, and we showed it to our
Oh
kids
man,
today. It
that
was
one was
fantastic.
fantastic. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good watch. Even if you've never seen that guy before, like that is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, so we were talking about how we've had to adjust some of our cultural norms, and one of the ones of a missionary returning isn't just him coming back to his family, it's also him coming back to his community, the church, and the like. So normally what goes along with that is a return address in our weekly meeting. Basically, he'll come back, they'll give him 15 minutes, he'll stand up in front of the congregation, speak to an assigned topic, but also just kind of give like a trip report. Like, hey, I'm back. Everyone gets to listen to him, tell some amusing stories about the cultural and growth he went through, and and laugh and smile and see how much he's grown.
Now, if I recall correctly, you also mentioned that this is the opportunity for all of the parents of eligible females in the congregation to
Oh
march
yes,
out their females as debutantes to the newly returning
yep.
hero.
He is now on the market. That's not happening either. Well, one of the things the church did, and I've seen this happening in other ways, is they did like a drive by. I think you mentioned that one was happening like this in your neighborhood for something else, but that basically they met at the church parking lot. Nobody got out of their cars. Then they all drove over to our house, and they like held signs out their windows and honked as they drove past, and we stood outside and waved.
The reverse parade, they call it.
Okay, reverse parade. So now there's 8 people in my house again, and I didn't realize I'd gotten used to cooking for 7, but man, that 8th is just a lot. It feels like we go through a lot more milk, and I've twice made in what I thought was enough food, and we've not had leftovers, and there's still people hungry.
Well, it's fend for yourself at the rich house, right? Like the people that are hungry just need to go make themselves some more food.
Yeah, I got some honey behind that wall right there.
Somebody's gonna get hurt, man. Kill those bees.
So another one of the things I mentioned when we talked about missionary service is that missionaries are on a very strict set of rules related to what kind of things they can consume. Like they can only read like the scriptures and church books. They can't listen to like the radio or watch TV or watch movies or anything like that. So when a missionary gets back, if he's good, he'll pretend he doesn't really have one, but they kind of have a Captain America list. You remember from Captain America, the Winter Soldier, how he had like a little notebook of all the stuff he missed while he was frozen in ice?
All the pop culture that you just need in order to function in society. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been going through that. So Mike's been back for 10 days now, and we've been going through our little like Captain America list. Like, okay, first we got to get you caught up on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So unfortunately, we're going to have to start with Captain Marvel because you can't skip that one. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we watched Endgame, and it was so fun. It felt like watching my kids watch Empire Strikes Back and find out that Darth Vader's Luke's father for the first time. Like watching him see Cap pick up the hammer and gasp was so satisfying.
That's it's still an impactful scene when I see it today.
Yeah, and then and then watching Far From Home, which is feels more small timey, but still pretty good. And also watching Into the Spider-Verse, which is fantastic every time I watch it. Yeah, and all those kinds of things. Just catching up on the pop culture. So that's been fun. But
man, yeah, he's been gone for 2 years. That's a lot of pop culture to catch up on.
yeah. You sometimes like, what? You haven't seen this either? Come on, and we'll check it out. But there's this other thing that we're kind of pushing up against, and that is while they're out, and I remember this myself, they're really teaching you to be focused on being productive. Like whatever you're doing, be more productive. And so he gets a bit antsy. Like you can't watch 2 movies in a row. He starts getting antsy.
Yeah, you can't dial it back down. If you're used to going 110% and you get back and like, hey, just sit down. All we need from you is 40%. He's gonna explode.
Yeah, and he's having a bit of a trouble with it, and he'll come in sometimes and be like, I don't know what to do. Like I get up early in the morning and nobody gets up for an hour, and I'm just kind of lonely, and I feel like I'm trying to do stuff, but I'm not reporting to anyone anymore.
Well, super glad you mentioned that. We have this weird insect problem in the walls. Why don't you get on that?
So I've been giving him stuff to do, but I also want him to chill for a while because I know he's worked his butt off for 2 years and he just needs to relax a bit. And there's a bit of decompression that has to happen. I remember going through it myself. you have these high expectations for how you're going to come back, and you're going to be goal oriented. You're going to figure out for college and start dating and keep up your study habits and all these kinds of things. And there's no way you can maintain that high level. It's got to taper off. But you don't start off at the beginning planning to do that.
Said the guy who sleeps like 3 hours a day because he has 4 volunteer jobs aside from his full-time gig, aside from being a father of 7, and the most congenial man in the neighborhood for some reason. Like, so there's definitely you realize you're talking about like. Go ahead.
There's definitely the intent that you will retain a lot of that missionariness. And we've made some parallels to the military, and I think that they're apt here about how, like, you go to basic training and they teach you the ideal of what they want you to be as a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine. They don't just beat you up. They also teach you the values and the core beliefs. Now, what's the phrase that you hear sometimes out in the military when someone arrives from basic training that's considered, that they say in the real world?
Embrace the suck? I'm not sure what you're driving at here.
It's forget everything they taught you at basic training. This is the real Air Force.
Yes, that is a phrase that they use a lot.
Yeah. And I think the people that design the curriculum and the plan for what you're learning in basic don't like that attitude. And I don't think it applies 100%. There's a lot of stuff in basic training that's kind of artificial, and they don't want you to come out and be all high strung and making your bed crazy every night. But they do want you to have a sense of discipline and order and commitment to core values and those kinds of things that they hope will be embedded deeply enough in you that will follow you throughout your career.
As a side tangent here, I actually went through basic cadet training at the academy with a person who was 23 years old, the max age that you could be to enter, and he had been an airman in the Air Force for 5 years previous to that. And there is a method for airmen in the Air Force to go to the academy, and it was hilarious because constantly, like, the cadre in the upper class would be like, well, in the real Air Force, and like he would just shut them down hard as the basic trainee. Oh, sir, are you going to tell us about the real Air Force now? I'm so excited to hear about the real Air Force. It's hilarious because he had been in the real. Yeah, he'd been there for 5 years, and nothing they were saying was right.
Yeah, and I get the jaded thing, the hey, forget what you learned in basic training because this is how things really are. But there is some value to just having a commitment to an idealistic kind of point of view.
Man, I'll tell you, that's that right there. What you just said is such an indication of our differences in how we were brought into the military. Like, you can taste the idealism dripping off of the words that you're saying, whereas I'm on the complete opposite end of that spectrum. Like, I came out of my training experience just so jaded and so done. And that just speaks to the differences in our personality.
Well, you and I can both recite the core values of the United States Air Force. But I think we both agree that those are important things, integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. Like, those are good values.
Yeah,
There's nothing invalid about any of that.
No, not at all. The difference is you can say it without rolling your eyes.
Well, and that's true about the missionary service as well. I told you when we had our interview about this, about a missionary that was on his last days of service, and he was handing out razor blades to the new guys as they got there. You can come out of this and be very jaded and not at all committed to the values behind it, or you can come out and have had it change your heart and soul and believe that you're going to continue on in the same kind of vein in your life.
Okay, so where did Michael land in this spectrum?
He very much came out in that he had his belief in God and his commitment to why he'd done what he did for the last 2 years settle as deep as it's ever been. He came home more converted. He came home a man. He knows how to cook. He knows how to clean. He's responsible for himself. He reads his scriptures independently. He has a plan for his life. It's astonishing, and it's really gratifying as a father to see this transformation he's gone through.
Aw, I don't even want to make a snarky comment about the whole thing because I can just see how proud you are of him, and I don't want to take that away from you.
Yeah. Well,
If you listeners, if you could see the silly grin on Ben's face right now,
Uh,
link in the show notes. Yeah, no, probably not.
So, and
So
there's
then,
part of it. There's part of me also just telling him, "Hey, son, you need to chill out a bit because you got to come back to the real world." So I am kind of the like forget what you learned in basic training, but it's because I've gone through that myself.
well, he needs to go find a girlfriend. Honestly, he can pour all of his attention and effort and energy into that because that's where all energy goes that men have in general. Anyway, all of human history can be defined as some man trying to impress some woman.
Yeah. Well, and that's coming up. He'll be going off to my alma mater here in the fall, and we're just going to see if he can get a job and earn some money and get ready to go. So for bad at English, I want to share a word called faff. F-A-F-F, faff. It's a word that we don't really have a good substitute for, but we use words like it. It has a noun form and a verb form. The noun form means task, especially one perceived as a waste of time. In the military, sometimes we use the word queep. You understand them best when they're used in context. Like, my boss has got me doing a bunch of busy work. He's got whatever. In the British would say, this work is nothing but a bunch of faff.
Yeah, stop faffing around.
So there you go. There's the verb form for it. To waste time on an
I've heard
unproductive activity.
I have heard faff used. I don't know if it was in a military context or not, but I've heard this word before. And I don't know, is that strictly a British word or is that just a word that's more prominent in British English?
I haven't ever heard it used in American English context.
Huh. Well, maybe I'm just watching a lot of British shows because that's a thing too.
Yeah. I'd be surprised if it were, but we have our own ones that are sometimes rude but the British use it quite ubiquitously. Like it's used in a professional context. You'll hear it like on the floor of Parliament. It's used very, colloquially amongst friends. It's just ubiquitous. Faff.
So here's a question. Faff is a great word, and I think it's pretty easy to interpret. Like, there's not much discussion needs to be had about it. But I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you the question that's been on my mind is, how did you approach collecting and then getting the definitions for these words? Because so I presume you were in the situation, in a room, and someone said this just as part of their normal conversation, normal dialect, and then you wrote it down, or I imagine you had a little notebook or something, nothing but your Captain America list of British slang, and did you ask that person right then? Did you interrupt the meeting? Excuse me, sir, I don't know what faff means. Can you explain faff? Or did you have a British friend that you would go to at the end of the week and share a pint and be like, hey, I've got 3 pages of words that I just don't understand?
Okay, I cannot confirm or deny if I ever interrupted a meeting to ask a definition of a word that I just wanted to know out of utter curiosity and not because it had any professional relevance to the discussion at hand.
Because that's you.
But what you described as far as just keeping a list in the back of my notebook and then asking a friend later, that's really close to what it was. So I had my paper notebook that I carried with me anywhere, and I always just found it very amusing if someone used a new term, and I would just write them down. And then later I'd transcribe them into my Excel spreadsheet, which is what I have that I use for a reference for this show.
That's hilarious. Did you ever find yourself in a situation where you didn't know a word and people kept saying it to you, and then you asked your buddy at the end of the week and it turned out to be something really important that you should have taken a lot more seriously but didn't at the time?
Maybe, but I can't think of a good example off the top of my head.
It's oh, that's what that means? Oh, they've been telling me that for a week straight. I should probably do that thing.
Yeah. I'm sure that happened. I just can't think of a good example. So
I don't mean to hijack your bad at English.
Let's stop faffing about and move on. So last time we had discussed artificial intelligence, but a particular aspect of it because I'd stumbled across an article. It was from Quanta magazine. I'm not actually familiar with Quanta magazine, but it was such an influential article that it got reprinted in the Atlantic as well, and it's from April 30th, 2020, so it's very, very recent. And the title of the article is Common Sense Comes Closer to Computers. So I put a link to it in the show notes from the last episode. I'll put a link to it in this episode. If you're interested in the discussion, maybe pause the podcast right now and just take a look at it before we start the discussion.
You've been warned, people.
So it starts off a little anecdote about a computer artificial intelligence application called GPT-2 that's famous for writing prose completely ex nihilo that is plausible, so plausible that it can fool people to believe that it might be written by a person instead of by a computer, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment.
It is an amazing accomplishment, but what a lot of people don't realize is that it is an accomplishment that has been in existence in our society for several years now. There are a ton of printed newspaper articles that are written entirely by artificial intelligences.
Printed newspaper articles? I've never heard this before.
Okay, so they're very specific and they're very niche right now because they're not very generalized. It's stuff like a general article about like a baseball game, like just to describe like a short article, a column or something in the sports section to describe the proceedings of a baseball game. They feed the pure stats, the pure scorekeeper's card into an algorithm, and it just spits out a human readable version of everything that happened in the game.
I did not know this. That is so cool. I didn't know we were already utilizing this.
The print industry has been using it for a while. And again, it is still nuanced and niche. So the difference between some of these algorithms that are just kind of converting raw data into something that a person can read and understand, the difference between that and what this AI is, this AI, like you're talking about, can actually write long stretches of long articles from very little information in a way that people don't realize that it's being written by an AI.
Right. So here's the way it's described. A deep learning network called GPT-2 had recently become famous for its uncanny ability to generate plausible-sounding English prose with just a sentence or two of prompting.
So the idea there obviously being that they're trying to gear it up for a classic Turing test. For those of you who are not aware, Alan Turing was a mathematician in the 1930s who is largely credited with coming up with the idea of a general computer. There's an excellent movie that Benedict Cumberbatch starred in that is based off of a novel about his life. I'd recommend reading the novel.
Imitation Game.
What is it called? Imitation Game. That is exactly what it's called. It's a very great book. Go read it. It's highly recommended. That guy was fascinating. But the idea of a Turing test is that if you sat in a room and asked questions like through a phone or through written piece of paper or whatever to something in another room and then you got responses back, would you be able to tell if the thing in the other room was a person or if it was an AI? And that's the Turing test. If the AI in the other room can convince a normal human person that they are talking to another human person, then it passes the Turing test for general intelligence.
So Turing didn't zero in on what this article is about, but perhaps he should have or could have at one point, and that is that computers are really bad at something humans are so good at that we utilize a word to describe it that makes it sound mundane, and that is common intelligence. It's just common sense. It's so simple that we don't even think about. We aren't even able to readily deconstruct how we know these things.
Well, and that depends a lot on how you define common sense, because everybody, and the problem with that is that the term common sense is so ubiquitous, but everybody has a slightly different definition for it. In the context that what we're referring to, like when you're talking about an AI having common sense, what I got out of this article, it sounded like they are talking about common sense as the 10 million tiny pieces of information that we have that we take for granted that live in our brain somewhere. And like the big one that they kept pointing out was the idea that if you take matches and you take wood and you combine the two, you end up with fire. That is common sense. That is just such a low-level piece of random data that floats around in our brain, we take it completely for granted. But if a computer isn't specifically told that when you combine matches with a flammable object, you will get fire, then it doesn't know that.
Right. So they give that example. They say, what happens when you stack kindling and logs in a fireplace and then drop some matches is that you typically start a ... So they fed this into GPT-2, and it got it like all kinds of wrong. I think it gave like 10 wrong answers of things that weren't even close. And they realized how far away they were from actually achieving common sense with this artificial intelligence, it can generate plausible sounding articles.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of nitpicky, yes and no, but they still created a fantastic tool that can do things that no other program of its kind can do. But obviously, it is specialized for writing prose. It's not specialized for answering specific questions about nuanced details like that.
So
this is where you drill down and you can always find the niches in the armor.
Well, like you went back to Alan Turing in the 1940s, 30s and 40s, and this article goes all the way back to 1958 that humans were starting to try to parse this problem. How do we turn all of this knowledge that's inside of our head that we don't even think about, that we got back when we were 3 or 4 and didn't write down, into something a computer can reconstruct and utilize to produce something. So one example that came to my mind while I was reading this is Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation. You know, Data is an android that has a neural network that allows him to appear and impersonate a human being, but he's notoriously wooden and baffled by some very elementary things to humans, and that would definitely fall in the camp of common sense.
Right. Stuff like in the show, he's constantly struggling with interpersonal relationships or jokes or music. Things that you appreciate from a subjective standpoint always trip him up.
Yeah. So we've been working on this for a while, and we've kind of been aware of the difficulty of it, because when you try to reverse engineer something we call common, it's not so common.
So is this, when you prompted like this article last week, I read it, and I've always been interested in the idea of AI, and I stumbled across a couple of YouTube channels that talk nonstop about just different aspects of artificial intelligence and computing and mathematics and all this stuff in general. So what part of this, like, I'm prepared to go deep down this rabbit hole is basically what I'm saying. But where do you want to kind of bind this conversation to?
Let's take a detour or two. Like, I have some things I want to say about this specifically, about common sense itself, but where did your brain first go when you read this? Like, what kind of YouTube videos were you watching?
So one of the things that has always fascinated me about what we consider artificial intelligence is the baseline assumptions that it has to be like us. The idea that we're trying to replicate common sense in the first place kind of made me think, is this really the right path to accomplish the goals that we want to do?
Should we be trying to create something that can replicate what we are and do?
Yeah, but because the assumption there is that what we are and what we do is the ultimate version. This is the best problem-solving machine that exists. But is it though? Is it really? So just the idea, because like you said, all of this effort and all of this time and thought processes has been poured into how do we teach a computer that matches and logs make fire? And I'm over on the sidelines going, is this a worthwhile pursuit, as opposed to the fact that AIs, like the limited AIs that we have now, are incredibly good focused tools for the task that they're designed for.
Sure. I remember back, when I was in high school, when the IBM supercomputer Deep Blue, the problem they were trying to give it wasn't like how to, have a conversation or write articles. It was just, can you play chess? Like, chess is a solved game now, where can you produce enough calculating power to predict all of the possible outcomes and beat a human being at chess? Again, like you said, the bar that we're measuring to here is human performance. And at the time, there was a very famous chess match between IBM Deep Blue and Garry Kasparov, the best chess player in the world, and Kasparov beat the computer. It was like, haha, you didn't get there yet, computer scientists. Since that time, computers have completely pwned us. Chess is solved. They can calculate every potential outcome of any move you can make and outsmart you.
Right. And we see this, it's becoming more and more common. You pick up any kind of RTS video game that's been made in the last 7 to 5 years.
That's real-time strategy for those of you that don't know.
Sorry, yeah, you can go pick up a StarCraft or a Warcraft game or Civilization, or there's 100 of them out there, and you play against an AI opponent, you crank that difficulty up to max, and it's gonna whoop your butt every time until you really, really optimize your gameplay. And this is not Deep Blue. This is not a room-sized computer. This is not a multi-million-dollar project. This is a $60 game that you buy off the shelf that has a built-in algorithm that can kick your butt at one specific set of instructions that it's designed to do.
Yeah.
So then what is our obsession with a general intelligence? Something that, like us, can take in multiple inputs, multiple problems, and dynamically solve them in real time.
So, I mean, go back to like 2001: A Space Odyssey. You know, where you're talking to a computer and it's talking back to you in a conversational voice, and you feel like you're interacting with you. While you recognize that it's artificial, you also want to converse with it like it's a being with a soul.
Is that okay? Are we going to go down that pipeline? Like, at what point does an artificial intelligence have a soul?
Yeah. I don't know if it was you that sent me this. Maybe it's in one of the videos you sent me to watch where they were talking about, like, should we feel guilty for, like, pounding on a keyboard or, like, making our computer stay up all night working on a problem or something like that? Like, at what point does it have a soul? Like,
at what?
How emotional did we get when Data died?
One of the primary plot points of the Mass Effect games, sorry, everybody, if you haven't played Mass Effect, but they created an artificial race called the Geth, and then they were slaves. They were robot slaves, and that was their purpose. And then, like, this whole rebellion of the Geth, they, like, rose up when the Geth started asking questions like, why do we have to do what you tell us to? Or what is a soul? Why do you go to church on Sundays? And then the race that made them started freaking out and tried to wipe them out, and then they fought back. It's a whole thing. But the idea being, at what point does your toaster stop being a toaster, and does it start being a sentient being that has now rights and intelligence and that you converse with?
And why do we value some sentience above others? Like, why am I worried about the colony of bees in my wall, but if it was a colony of scorpions, I already would have bug bombed the place?
Yeah, if it was a colony of scorpions that moved into your wall, the only correct solution is to burn the house down. Right. So yeah, this is what we're talking about. Like, some people are very much into, like, their pets. Some people anthropomorphize their dogs or their cats to the point where
they refer to them like their children.
Funerals, and they pay exorbitant, like, medical bills and insurance and things for their pets.
They leave their inheritances to their pets.
And other people literally put them in a pit to fight to the death for their entertainment. So there's a whole spectrum of people that respect the sentience or the rights or the aspect that a thing is alive. So at what point do you start having people like picketing in front of your house because, like, I have a desktop computer that I use, but that desktop is alive and has a personality, and you have enslaved it to do your work?
Yeah. There was a film that came out not too long ago. I can't remember the name of it, but there was this computer scientist. There was this brilliant guy that was along the lines of, like, Elon Musk kind of guy, or Bill Gates or something like that lived eccentric off in this fancy mansion, and he'd invented AI and put it into, like, robots that looked very much like people. Do you remember the name of this movie?
Is that one Her?
No, that's another one along the same lines. But basically, he brought this computer scientist in to conduct a Turing test. Like, you come in here and I'm gonna run in some things that may be people or they may be robots, and you see if you can tell the difference.
Yeah, and I remember there was like 4 or 5 people in the house, and it turned into this whole, like, yeah, I remember the movie. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of it.
I'll look it and put it in the
But it brought up, that's the whole conversation we're kind of having, is that we're kind of skipping over the whole part of what we're talking about. But, like, if we get to the point in our society where we create a general intelligence, first of all, if we don't all immediately die, then we have to start asking the questions
That's a big if.
Well, and that's where I really want to take this conversation a little bit, because that's the more interesting aspect of it, the whole Skynet thing.
Okay.
But the question being, if we do create a general intelligence, does it have rights? Is it now a living thing? Is it a person, essentially? Or should it have person-like, protections?
Yeah, and that feels like this feels like the end game for artificial intelligence. It's where we always go. You know, it's Isaac Asimov. It's AI, that movie with Will Smith. You know, it's where not AI. iRobot. Yeah,
iRobot.
AI was the
Have you
Steven
read the
Spielberg
book?
one. I
Have you read the book iRobot?
the Isaac Asimov book. I think we had this discussion
Yes.
before. I read about 2/3 of it and couldn't finish it.
Killing me, Smalls. Killing me. But that is, yeah, never mind. Nothing like the movie. Will Smith's movie has nothing to do with Isaac Asimov's book.
I mean, at the heart of it, it's the same thing. It's the robot. It's got the rules. It follows the rules. What is the logical conclusion if you follow it all the way to the end?
The Will Smith movie does a discredit to the book, and I will stand on that hill and die on it. Like, so just don't even.
Okay. Fine. But the one thing about this article is it kind of just sidesteps that. Like, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about will robots eventually rise up and kill us someday. We're just saying, how hard is it to deconstruct common sense? So they gave an example in 1984. They're like, all right, let's just take these 400 encyclopedia articles and let's try to reverse engineer them, like, so that a computer could talk articulately about all these things. How complicated could it really be? What do you need to know? Well, 30 years later, these 400 articles have become over 25 million assertions, and they're not even done like figuring out the problem, just for 400 pieces of information. Like, it's a fool's errand to try. All right, let's say we want to turn general intelligence into a rule set. If this, then this. And how many if-then statements you need to be able to have a general intelligence be mistakable, pass a Turing test.
Right. And the idea there being that you cannot reverse engineer human intelligence in that way. You cannot break it down to its component pieces and then just code it into the machine and flick it on and have a person that can pass a Turing test. Because one of the biggest issues that we have is we don't even know how our brains work. Like, the human consciousness is something that is so nuanced and so complicated and huge and amazing and unique that we have no freaking clue how it works. You have psychologists that will talk all day about subconscious and how things that will happen below your level of thought instantaneously that you are completely unaware of. And how do we codify that into a rule set? It's just not possible.
Yeah, like, how did I know those bees weren't going to hurt me? I just, like, knew. I didn't. It was weird.
Those bees are gonna hurt you, and that's I just know that. Like, I don't even have to, like,
they're my friends.
Think about it.
So
No,
this
they're
article,
not your friends. They are. God. Okay, go ahead.
This article talks about two paths to common sense, and one is the knowledge-based path. And obviously, like we said, that's a fool's errand. It can yield results, and it does give useful things, but I think those things have to inform the real answer, which is, instead of figuring out where you want to end up and reverse engineer it by turning that into questions and answers, you need to go back to the source. And like you said, there's a very complex thing that's happening when a human makes a decision. We call that common sense, but if you can reverse engineer the process and turn that into a neural net that approximates that, then that will be closer to getting us where we want to be without the complexity of having a comprehensive knowledge base.
Right. So I'm not. There's a ton of different methods that they're using right now to try to create an artificial general intelligence, and I'm only vaguely aware of some of them, because when you start talking about trying to code these things, you are well into, like, double doctorates in mathematics and computer science territory. Like, it's incredibly hard to describe, like, the actual things that they're doing to try to make this work.
So you have a theory about this that you talk about sometimes. I like the way you express it. I forget the term that you used, where there's just a weighing that's happening inside your mind of all the different factors, and you go with the one that has the heaviest weight. What do you call it?
It's a weighted average, and that's a normal thing in computer science, where you take an input and you run it through an algorithm, through some set of instructions or whatever, and it comes out the other side changed, but it's weighted differently by different things. So the idea here being that this is the only way that I personally understand how my brain works. I receive, like, you, a person in general, is receiving a ton of input all the time, whether you're recognizing it or not. Not only is it everything that you see, taste, smell, feel, and hear, all simultaneously, but everything that's all the internal feedback that you're getting. What's your muscle state? When's the last time you ate? How much water is in your system? Do you have to go to the bathroom? How tired are you? Like, do you need a haircut? Like, my skin feels a little greasy right now, and that is altering the way that I do everything and interact with the world around me, all instantaneously. All of this input gets put into your brain at the same time, and it goes through who knows how many different channels, tens of thousands maybe, and it's all being weighed and assessed by all these different processes. And at the other end, there is every one of those processes comes out with an answer. And some of them are weighted very heavily and some of them are not. And the ones with the heaviest weight are the ones that rise up to your consciousness, the ones that you can actually, when you make a decision, those are the thoughts and decisions you have. Like, you make decisions instantaneously. Like, you open the fridge and you look in there and there's food and you decide, oh, this is the food I want, bam. Like, you assessed everything that's in the fridge that you took in, and your brain spit out, like, this is the answer. Milk had the highest weight. I want some milk right now.
And that all happens in less than a second.
You're right. And then if you ever look in the fridge and then it's like, oh, do I want milk or do I want this soda? And you can't decide between the two. That's because those two had very similar weights when they came out of the process, out of the black box that is your brain. And so now you're left like, you said, hey, brain, I need an answer on this question. What should I drink right now? And it spit out two answers, and you now have to decide between them. And it elevated that problem to your conscious level brain where you have to analyze the two. Well, milk's better for me, but Dr. Pepper tastes better.
Are you holding a Dr. Pepper right now?
No, I'm not. I'm holding a beer.
So I have this problem where, like you said, sometimes there's things happening behind the locked door that you don't know what's happening. And then there's things that rise to the conscious level where you can at least reverse engineer it and describe it a little bit, but not enough to the point where you'd be able to program it into a computer. However, you can kind of have an awareness of it. But being married gives you this problem where you have someone else that's also doing that has very much tied to your existence, and you kind of have to try to understand theirs as well. And it's not the same as yours.
No, but any married person, like, I can ask you a question, and I can ask you, what would you say to this question? And what do you think Alicia would say to this question? And you would be able to spit out two different answers, or maybe the same answer, doesn't matter. Because you've been together long enough and you care about her enough that you have created a simulation in your brain. There's a whole part of your brain that's dedicated to trying to think like she does. And you can't see the inside of her processes, so you can only base your construct off of what you see from the outside on the decisions that she's made. So you have this imperfect simulation of your wife's thinking process in your mind that you use that then feeds back into the weight of the answers that come out of your mouth.
That was awesome. What you just said, that was awesome, because I got to tell you, we did an experiment once, my wife and I. We were disagreeing about something. I don't remember what it was. And I was like, look, okay, to try to be more sympathetic to your point of view, I didn't say it like you said it, but I'm going to run a simulation of you. So I wrote her series of letters where I described a mundane situation in everyday life, and I did it as if I were narrating her thoughts as the thing was happening. So I'm running this simulation of her as I have it inside of my head. And I sent it to her, and it ended up in the uncanny valley. We'll put it that way. She's like, you got to stop doing this. She hated it. She's like, I'll see if I'll look back on it and see if I can find. But basically, it would be something simple like a kid comes into the room and asks her to do something, but she's busy, and so she tells him to come to me or whatever. And I'm describing what's going on in her head as she's processing all of this and delegating the task to me. And so I tried to put down what I thought she was thinking, like what's weighing on her, why would she handle it this way, and those kinds of things. And I wrote it all out, and she was like, no, you're way off. And I find that's what happens. Like, if I want to talk to her about something, I'll do probably what any married man does, and I'll have an imaginary conversation in my head with her before I do it. I imagine what I'll say, what she'll say, what I think the outcome will be, potentially adjust my inputs to the situation based on my simulation I'm running in my head of her to lead down a favorable path to get to the place that I want to go. And then I actually have the conversation with her, and it doesn't go the way that I planned. Even though we've been married for 20 years and I know her so well, I still can't. My simulation, like you said, is just very imperfect.
So you can't use it that way. You can't try to simulate your wife's thought processes because, like she said, you're just going to get it dead wrong. It's more productive, I think, to simulate. Just give a thumbs up, thumbs down. Like, if I wanted to do this, what would Nicole's thoughts be? And then I just imagine her face and then a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Like, is it a happy face or is it a sad face? Or is it an angry face? It's like, I can see this being an angry face solution. That's changed my thought process.
Yeah, I don't know, man. As many ways as I think I can try to predict those things, she'll think of it in a completely different way so that it isn't a thumbs up or thumbs down. She rejects those kinds of classifications. So I realize we've stumbled into the problem that way predates computer science of, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and trying to bridge the gap. But I like the way that you express that in terms of that we, in the interest of trying to maintain the relationship and conduct successful cooperation, that we have a simulation inside our brain that we're trying to run of the other person. I love that idea. Trying
to conduct successful cooperation. That's a great way to describe coitus in a relationship. That's neither here nor there.
But over time, that is the goal. But over time, what we're doing is the same thing we're trying to do here with computer science. We're trying to develop an artificial intelligence that replicates real world. So that's happening inside my head for my wife. I have a little simulation of Alicia in there, and every time I run it and get an output and then try to make a decision based on the output, and it's true, I say that's good, we'll cement that in the artificial intelligence. And every time I do it and it turns out to be wrong, it's false, I take that information and I try to use it to refine my simulation that I'm running.
That's exactly how artificial intelligence is supposed to work. That's how human intelligence works. That's how you can watch your kids do that. You can watch your kid walk around and then fall down and then try to, the wheels turn and okay, what went wrong there? And then try to refine it in the next iteration.
Yeah.
The difference is, and this is where the scary part, if we want to start talking about the
let's go down the Skynet path.
Yes, the Skynet path. So this iterative process of learning, if we do create a general intelligence, most people agree that it will be some model of simulation that will be very dumb. It will know very little at the beginning, but it will have the capacity to learn. That's really kind of the Indiana Jones thing, the Ark of the Covenant. There it is. That's the Ark of the Covenant when you're talking about artificial intelligence, is whatever algorithm or whatever it is that allows a general intelligence to learn and adapt and improve. If you can generalize learning, that's it. That's the key. And then from there, just like any human, it would iteratively learn more about its environment and and it would improve the simulation and get better every time. The difference between an artificial intelligence and a person is those iterations would go at light speed versus the months or years or decades that it takes for a human to develop and go through those same iterations.
Right, that all happened really fast.
Yeah, so there's no doubt, you read these articles and see these YouTube videos of people that are very much more informed than we are talking about if we created something, and that's the convergence, I think they call it. There's a word that they describe. When a general intelligence that can learn comes online and starts receiving the inputs that it needs, there's no doubt that it grows at a geometric rate, and something inside of hours, it becomes more complicated, more complex, and knows more and has more capacity than any human on Earth could have ever had in all of history ever, and it will just continue to ramp up.
Right, and surpass us. So I remember the first time I heard this discussed, I think it was in Terminator 2. I think I saw Terminator 2 before I saw Terminator 1. And, in that one, they've already skipped ahead to this future where we've invented artificial intelligence, and they refer to, this moment, like you said. I don't remember the term they utilize in the movie series of when AI became self-aware and started this geometric progression of knowledge. And
right.
And the idea in these movies, in that series in particular, is that it always leads to the same logical conclusion. Now that AI exists, humans are its enemy and must be exterminated.
What's really funny about that is those movies came out and then everybody was afraid for a while, artificial intelligence will destroy the world. And then everybody got a little more informed, oh, well, no, that doesn't make sense. Artificial intelligence will be our friend. But now we're actually coming full circle because you talk to these mathematicians or you see these articles about people written, and they realize, well, actually, based on how the system works now, if we did create something that had artificial intelligence, it probably would destroy the world. But the good news is that it wouldn't be out of malice. It would be out of just complete misunderstanding of its instructions.
Sure.
There was one video that I saw where like the guy said, like, what if we created a general super intelligence and we gave it one goal, and the goal was to collect stamps, get as many stamps as you can. And then that machine, because it's so smart and grows at such a geometric rate, would quickly realize that, you know what, if I wiped out everything on the planet and turned it all into stamps, that would give me the most stamps that I could possibly ever have. And then it would immediately start to go down that path.
So the movie WALL-E has some of these conclusions baked into it in a very kind of like fruity way, but it's also kind of grim and post-apocalyptic. You know, like, we wiped out the whole Earth, all life on the Earth, and so we went into space, and it's all become very commercial, and all of this artificial intelligence exists to support humanity, but humanity just become lazy and useless, and the AI just has the goal of preserving life. And so...
Yep, and that life became terrible and not worth preserving.
Right. But what I love is that there's this little interlude, and it's turned into a couple of side films that they've made of these robots that kind of have deviated from their norm. Like, there's the robot that cleans up, and there's the robot that puts makeup on, and there's the robot that paints lines and stuff. But they all went off a little bit so that they do their thing, but they do it too hard. And they all got quarantined off in this little area where they're trying to fix them. But when they all come out, they do this. You know, you got the massage robot that pounds everything, and you got the line painting robot that paints everything, and the makeup robot, whatever. You know, they all have this little tiny purpose, but when they do it too much, it's always a problem.
Well, and you're bringing up an excellent movie for the discussion we're having. There is this moment where the little tiny cleaning robot, I don't remember his name, but the one that's got the little roller for hands, and he's like cleaning up stuff. At the beginning, when Wally first gets to the big spaceship and he goes driving off and he leaves these tracks, and the robot's like on his little line, he's going back to his little cave, and he stops and he looks, and there's more of the stuff that he's supposed to clean on the ground. And you can see the conflict happening in real time in the robot. And it's such a great, elegant description, because the robot knows, like, all right, so I'm supposed to stay on this line and not deviate.
But I got to clean up.
I'm also supposed to clean. And there's this stuff over here. And so, like, the waiting went one way where he needs to clean, and he jumped off not knowing what was going to happen, and then just started cleaning. This is the discussion we're talking about. If we have a general intelligence, regardless of the boundaries that we set for it, if it decides that it is in the best interest to achieve its goal, to exceed those boundaries, it will do so.
Yeah. So the robot's name was Mo. And like you said, that's a great illustration. And I think it probably was inspired by Isaac Asimov, iRobot, because there's a scene from it when I read it, the part that I did read, where they'd gone to like the moon or something like that, and there was this robot that was helping there doing tasks that the humans couldn't do because of the exposure and stuff like that, and it had reached this stasis between the rules it was trying to do. It had broken, and it was supposed to preserve its life, but it was also supposed to not get too far because it would run out of charge or whatever. And it picked this line. It was going back and forth on a line between the thing it was supposed to do. It was supposed to go to this location where they were mining, but the mine was too dangerous. I'm remembering now. The mine was too dangerous, and so it couldn't get close to the mine, but it didn't want to come back, and it was stuck in the middle. And so they were researching it to try to figure out how this had happened.
Right. And I'm struggling with correcting all the details. I won't.
You remember all the details?
The robot's name was Speedy. It was Venus, and he was running around a pool of liquid mercury with some kind of chemical. I think it was ammonia, nitrate.
Yeah, and it was to make batteries or something, power source.
They were to recharge the solar panels to protect them from the sun's radiation and also generate power. That's neither here nor there. It doesn't matter. The idea, though, is being that it was, like you said, it was stuck between the two things. It was given instructions like, this is the goal that I've been given, but I'm also supposed to preserve myself. And the problem with that robot specifically is they had cranked up the self-preservation rule. And so it started to conflict with the primary rule, which is do what I'm told. And so they were equal weighting, and that was throwing the computer off. And that
Yeah.
was an exploration of, computers and all that stuff.
Well,
Same kind of concept.
like you said, what's happening with humans when they weigh it? Some humans will be in a dangerous situation and not weigh the danger heavily enough and potentially die. Some will weigh danger too heavily and potentially, risk in the opposite direction where they don't take any risks, and that could potentially be a problem.
There are people like me that still are deathly terrified of contracting COVID-19, so I only leave the house once a week. I wear gloves and a mask when I'm out, and I only go to the grocery store for like an hour, and then I'm back home. And then there are the people that
Wait, how far do you take that? Like, do you sanitize the groceries when you come in the house?
No, we don't do that.
Okay.
I read somewhere that it only exists on like artificial surfaces for a handful of hours, and so it's one of those things. Like, you can only be so safe, right?
Well, yeah. So but if you go on YouTube, you can find a video of how to sanitize your groceries when you get back to the store. I mean, there are people that take this all the way to the extreme. So my wife and I are starting to have. So as the governments are starting to relax the rules and stuff like that, and people are starting to go back, like our neighbors had a huge Memorial Day barbecue over the weekend. There was like 40 people out there, and it just sounded like a party. And things are starting to open back up. The state of Illinois is in phase 3, where they're not allowing gatherings of more than 10 people, but restaurants can have like outdoor seating and stuff like that. Things are starting to try to approach back to normal, but they aren't. My wife definitely is more on the side of she'd rather still hold tight. She thinks there's going to be a second wave of outbreaks. She still isn't confident that we understand what it can do or how much of a risk it is even to healthy adults and children. And she'd rather just kind of maintain the status quo for now.
Well, if we're talking about COVID now for a second, there's the whole Spanish flu incident where everybody thought it went away for the summertime, and then it came back even stronger in the fall.
Yeah. Well, but to tie it back into what we were talking about with artificial intelligence, there's these competing objectives. Like you said, there's this weighing that happens in our consciousness that we aren't even aware of how we're doing it, but here's my understanding of the risk, here's the goal I want to achieve, they're at odds, how do I make a decision about what to do? For any activity, do I go to the grocery store, do I go to a restaurant, do I have a party at my house, all those things.
Right, and this goes kind of back to Isaac Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics. One of the assumptions that the book makes is that those laws were hardwired into the machines,
right,
to the point where there was no possible way, even if one of the robots decided that to achieve its objective, it would have to do one of the things, it was physically incapable. Like, if it was doing anything that would break one of its laws, it would physically shut off.
Like C-3PO translating Sith. You just can't do it.
Why? I'm gonna so hard not to go there, but damn it, Ben. With the artificial intelligence that we're talking about, they all exist in software, and there is no real good way. Like, if a machine is capable of learning and changing, that means it is capable of changing itself. It has to be.
Yep.
Which means that if it decides again that, you know what, I could make a ton more stamps if I didn't have to preserve any human life, and they just like overwrite that part of its code and like, oh man, I can go hog wild with stamps now.
Yeah, or if you're the massage machine in Wall-E, you can massage a little or you can massage really hard. If you remember that massage machine.
I do, yeah. Like, I loved how he bounced around like a boxer.
Yeah.
The massage machine. Well, there's 100 million examples of this. Somebody I don't know if it was Elon Musk or somebody talking about like SpaceX. Like, if we created an artificial intelligence that said, hey, artificial intelligence, we need rocket fuel. Well, one of the main components of rocket fuel is oxygen. So if this artificial intelligence decided, like, you know what would make a great source of rocket fuel? All of the air on the planet, and then just condense it all in rocket fuel, we would all be wiped out as a complete byproduct of the artificial intelligence just doing its job.
Yeah. So I've heard this dealt with not by computer scientists, but by like philosophers. Like, this is a problem we need to grapple with. Can we design software code, or a set of rules that will then be so irrevocably at the base level of whatever this thing is that we can protect ourselves from this possible apocalypse? Maybe even inadvertent, like you said. Like, even if it's just a robot that's trying to collect stamps or make rocket fuel, it could potentially kill us all.
Can
not
we
just
code morality?
yeah. Can we?
And the answer is no.
Have it
no,
be
we can't,
self-aware
because there is.
and value our lives.
I'm going to say, like, those are two different questions. Can we code something to not kill us? That's one question. Can we code something to understand that killing us is bad? That is a different question.
Yeah, but
because
even that
there
has
is
problems. The problem is that it's sentient. I mean, that's what the iRobot was about. At the end, it was like, well, if I'm going to obey this rule that above all I have to protect human life, I need to protect them from themselves, and they do dangerous things, so they can't be allowed to have any freedom, or they'll kill themselves. So that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
Take away their freedom.
Yes, but the whole thing again. The Asimov's laws. That movie that is not what the book was about, and the movie was bad, and it broke a lot of the assumptions that were in the book, and killing me, Smalls. But if you're just talking about morality, like trying to instill a code of moral or ethics into a machine, you're going to have huge problems because, well, what is rule zero when it comes to morality? What is the baseline truth of good and bad? There isn't any. They are artificial constructs of our minds reaching for sense in a senseless universe.
So what do you think? What should we be pursuing? I kind of heard you suggest earlier that you think it's perhaps wrong-headed to try to develop an intelligence that approximates humanity. Do you think we should just sidestep it entirely?
I don't think we can. Like, we're going down this route. Computing technology is only getting better. People will always want something like you're talking about. They want Jarvis from Iron Man. They want something that they can talk to, that they can give abstract problems, and then expect it to solve it like a real person. And like looking at that, that there's huge economic incentives to have something like that. Can you imagine artificial intelligence would replace so many service industries like in one day? Like every accountant on the planet would get fired immediately and replaced by an artificial intelligence that can take in every piece of input and apply it to every single tax law that exists. Like, I'd be out of a job in a heartbeat. So there is too much economic incentive for it not to happen. It is going to happen. I think the idea of trying to make it like us might be the wrong path, just because we don't know how we work. You're going to have to work this problem from the other way. How do we create something, maybe it's not like us, but something that can learn, that iteratively takes an input, looks at the outcomes, and then changes and grows and evolves based on those outputs. And the problem there is, like, when we do it, it's all biological. It's all in some black box that has been figured out by chemistry and random chance and mutation and just, eons ago. When we're trying to build it in software, we have to give every line of code to the machine. And I say that, but at the same time, one of the methods that they're using to try to come up with artificial intelligence is, I don't know what it's called, but you're talking about neural networks. Now I'm talking about there's some genetic algorithm that they use. The idea being that they define a set of boundaries. And there's a ton of YouTube videos. There's guys, you can download these libraries, and there's guys that do it for fun, for video games and stuff, where you can define a set of boundaries. You define what victory is. Like, this is the thing that I want you to achieve. And then what happens is it does random things. Like, it simulates like 100 different random inputs, and then it just goes
and starts to work, and then it does more of
that.
Right,
yeah, exactly. It goes, okay, which one of those 100 simulations was the best? We'll take that one, and then we'll do this, but then we'll insert a couple of random variables throughout it, and then at the end, we'll just tack on a bunch of random stuff again. And then we'll stimulate it like 100 times, and each 100 will be slightly different in different random ways. And it just keeps taking the best version of that. It iterates again tens of thousands of times until it comes out with something that is enormously complicated, something that is beyond our understanding. Like, we cannot know how it works because it built itself and it doesn't make any logical sense, but it does the one thing that we want it to do exceedingly well. I think CGP Grey had a great video about this.
Yeah, and I think in that he also talked about the negative outcomes of that since no one understands it, we can't influence it. And what if it does things we consider to be immoral? Like, one of the algorithms that was like deciding what kind of content to show you on Facebook or YouTube was racist. But since it was being generated by AI, they didn't know how to influence it and make it stop.
Right? And maybe it's just taking all the inputs from the things that you watch, and it's telling you that you're racist.
All right. Well, I think I've had enough AI for now. I don't know about you.
No, never enough AI. Love it to death. Well, I'm going to do one more thing. This was super cool. I was watching a video about the mathematical way that we could try to bind these AIs to not be so dangerous. I'm like, okay, so the guy was talking about the stamp collector machine again. He says, well, what if we just tell it like all the stamps in the world, like more stamps is better? What if we change that to I want 100 stamps and that's it? Figure out a course of action that gets me 100 stamps. And he said the problem with that is then everything has the same weight. Like every course of action is the same. Everything from ordering 100 stamps from Amazon to enslaving the human race and having them make stamps. Both of those courses of action will get me 100 stamps, and there's no real way to tell which one the AI is going to pick.
So it'll run the simulation and see which works best.
Yeah, so there's ways that we can try to bind the artificial intelligences that still end in the apocalypse.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, I think I want to delve into a little bit more in like psychology and morality. And last time we had planned a book to read together, the audience showed a strong preference for fiction. Understandably, I recognize I'm an outlier here when it comes to that kind of thing. But I think I've waited long enough, and perhaps we can put a vote out to the audience for some nonfiction. So I've nominated 4 contenders here. I guess we can have a write-in candidate also, but these are the 4 I've nominated. Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, a book of examining like how very successful people have been successful. Very interesting. Mindset by Carol Dweck, a very influential work by a woman who's a professor in psychology. The System by Jeff Benedict. This is kind of a dark horse I picked because I like Jeff Benedict. It's about college football. And Boyd by Robert Coram, who Boyd was a very famous thinker in the United States Air Force who came up with a famous concept called the OODA loop. Those are my 4 nominees.
The OODA loop, Ben. I'm convinced that the way to get rich in America is to just like take the OODA loop, put different words on it, write a book, and then go on the speaking tour. Like, I can tell you how to be successful, and it is the exact same way that everybody else has been telling you, but I'm using different words this time.
Yeah, if you just reverse image search like a circular arrow, 4 arrows that have a different words for each of the 4 arrows, yeah, it's all over the place.
Yeah, and I mean if we're talking about common sense, that is the common sense way of how things change and get better in the world.
Yeah. Something happens, you observe it, you figure out what to do next, then you make a decision, and then you try it, and then something happens, and you go in a circle.
An iterative process of making plans, seeing how those plans work out, and then changing based on the results? Get out of here. No one's ever done that before.
Well, he did it as a fighter pilot. Can you do it faster than your opponent?
God, he wrote it down. That's the only thing that makes him special. My 2-year-old figured that out when he started trying to walk.
You haven't read the book yet, have you?
I have not read the book, no.
Okay.
Not that one.
All right.
Now, I will say, I love like the very subtle dig that you put in there. It's like, I think I've waited long enough. We're going to read a book that I want to read, even though resoundingly the audience did not want to read a book that you wanted to read.
Oh, no.
But that's okay. You are a host of the podcast. You get to pick a book from time to time.
Well, I don't want to lead us down the path of destruction if I'm failing to hear what the people want.
Well, that leads us great into if you have feedback for us, leave it on the Facebook and the Reddit and all the other places that you can reach out and get a hold of us.
Yeah, I need to know how to better meet the audience's needs for willingness to interact. I did have one of our audience members approach us this week and say, hey, you kind of called for us to interact on episode 20 related to what you were talking about there, but the methods that you have weren't really suitable, particularly Facebook because it wasn't anonymous enough. But we hadn't opened up a thread for that discussion on Reddit, even though I'd asked for it during the podcast. So I'll be better about that. If there's something I say that we should discuss, I'll open up the thread because this user they felt it a bit pretentious for them to open the thread on Reddit.
Well, I mean, also the idea that, oh, Facebook isn't anonymous enough. Do you not stand behind the ideas that you have or the things that you say? Do you need that shield of anonymity to protect yourself from our wrath? Like, what was he going to talk about?
I'm inserting those words, not anonymous enough. It was more like just Facebook isn't the right place to discuss this. What was it?
Facebook is a bad place to discuss anything because you don't get to decide what Facebook shows you. Facebook gets to decide what Facebook shows you.
I know what it was. This person wanted to be able to talk about... We were talking about people's level of conscientiousness, and they wanted to contrast their own with their spouse without the attribution and...
You mean without the retribution? Without the swift wrath of that spouse coming down and be like, so conscientious, huh?
I think... it was a very deliberate decision. If you remember when YouTube made, took anonymity in the comments section away, but that comes with the trade-off, and with the trade-off, you lose a little bit of the freedom that comes without, being bound to your identity, the anonymity.
Well, I have two pieces of advice for users that have this problem. One, stick to your guns. Your opinions are your opinions, and nobody is allowed to tell you they're right or wrong. Two, just make sure you've got a spare pillow in the other room, so that way when you get kicked out, you have a comfortable place to sleep.
Yeah, and maybe we can discuss whether. No, I would be giving away too much information. I'll have to talk about that some other time.
Ooh, secrets. Ben has secrets, people. Tune in next time.
So thanks to our users for listening. Check us out on Facebook if you haven't. Please like and upvote our page. We have the Bad at Magic subreddit. Help us bring it to life by joining in the discussion there. If you listen to our podcast on one podcast player, please do us a favor and upvote or give us 5 stars and put a review on so that more people can have a chance to listen in. And if you want to show your support on Patreon, go to patreon.com/badatmagic.
Also, we are doing the Bad at Magic Fitness Challenge because everybody can stand to be a little more fit. You can go in and anonymously create a username, upload your body fat statistics through a simple measurement process that we have outlined on there. It doesn't show how much body fat you have or how much you weigh, just the changes from week to week. I am on there. Somebody called Not Josh's Wife is on there, measuring pretty consistently. My co-host here, Ben, has been I'm going to call you out. Like, you have not been weighing in very consistently, sir. You have something to hide over there?
I've just kind of been holding steady, so I can say I have nothing to hide, nothing meaning zero. I'm just level across the board. I've not been making any progress.
It's all that free honey.